Okay, rebels and outliers, let's discover and unpack your unique life purpose. The survival of any society or any community is dependent upon its ability to adapt, to evolve, and to remain relevant. Anything which doesn't evolve and adapt inevitably perishes. This social evolution depends on outliers. In order to challenge and to break up the status quo, there needs to be ones who exist outside of the status quo, who can see the status quo for what it is, all of its shortcomings, deficiencies, and outdated ideologies that the ones who are immersed in the status quo simply can't see. The thing needs to be viewed from the outside, and then it needs to be challenged from within. Rebels have an uncomfortable but vital role to play in any society which wishes to thrive. But it's easy to be a rebel without a cause. It's easy to be pissed off with the world. It's easy to focus on all the things that we hate or all the things that are dysfunctional and broken. It's easy to be combative, to believe ourselves to be superior, to shun society and sit back hoping that the whole thing will fall apart and cease to be. It's easy to be shocking and deliberately disruptive. It's easy to refuse to participate, but a rebel without a cause actually isn't very useful to society and actually doesn't serve to inspire evolution. In fact, it can cause stubborn stagnation or even de-evolution. We'll unpack this further. What society requires is a rebel with a cause. Outliers or rebels who still give a shit. Ones that can see the dysfunction for what it is and offer an alternative, presenting a better solution in a way that inspires the status quo to open and embrace new possibilities. It requires rebels who can shine a big, bright light on the mess of society and compassionately, but still rebelliously, show them the beauty that they could achieve if they would but accept the cleaning tools that you are handing them and get to work. This isn't easy. It takes a truly conscious and hardcore rebel to pull off a feat like that, because the status quo is easy. It's comfortable and easy to stay the same. So what could inspire the majority to bother to dig into their most rigid corners and to do the hard work of challenging their most ingrained and preciously adhered to beliefs? It's hard to change. It takes guts and gusto. And it's also hard to be a rebel and still give enough of a shit about a society that is obviously malfunctioning to put in the lifelong work of becoming and embodying an ideal which could actually inspire the majority to want to change. But alas, this is the ancient and essential role and the work which has been assigned to rebels and outliers. And today, as a fellow rebel and outlier, I'm going to walk you through the three essential and absolutely key components in pulling off being a rebel with a cause, or a rebel with a purpose, or a rebel with something to direct all of that evolutionarily rich and creative life force into. Because you've got a role to play, and being a rebel, however much you might not want to believe it, comes with responsibility. So rebellious cautionary point number one is just being rebellious or combative or opposing or shocking for the sake of it. We get it. You can see what's wrong. You can see the dysfunction. You're acutely aware of all the things that are malfunctioning in society. But what are you doing about it? So you might be special and you might be unique in that you are a rebel and you are an outlier and you aren't a part of mass consciousness or the status quo. Well done. But you're not as bloody special and unique as you perhaps think you are. For as long as society has been societying, there have always been rebels and outliers. Of course there have been. Every generation has had its rebels and its outliers. And we can even look back to recent history and see the rebels and outliers. We had the hippies of the 70s, we've had punks, we've had goths, and in my generation, we had emos. But so often what ends up binding and bringing together these outlier or these rebellious groups is how pissed off they are. They realize that there's something wrong with society and they just want to sit around giving society the middle finger. They want to rebel, they don't want to do things the way that others are doing it, they don't want to adhere to the status quo, they don't want to be members of society, basically. So they set themselves up in their own little society and they just sit back and go, I refuse to participate. What the actual and intended role and useful role of a rebel or an outlier is to offer a better alternative. It's not just about opposing something, that's a step towards something, but then you have to be standing for something. And this is what distinguishes a rebel without a cause and a rebel with a cause. A rebel without a cause is just rebelling for the sake of it, being confrontational for no real reason, just because they're pissed off and they don't want to do what everyone else is doing. But a rebel with a cause actually stands for something. So it's not just about going, well, stuff your society, I don't want to be a part of it, so I'm just going to sit back and do nothing and bludge around and take lots of drugs and smoke a lot and drink a lot and consume resources and be a slob and do nothing and contribute nothing. Because what does that achieve? You're meant to be, if you can see what's wrong, your role then is to offer a better alternative. And if the alternative that you are offering humanity or that you're presenting to society is that of a slob or someone that is useless and doesn't get a job and doesn't study and doesn't learn and doesn't grow, what are the chances that the status quo is going to see you as an example and aspire to be more like you? You're rebelling, but you're not achieving anything. So the ideal, the goal here and the role of the rebel is not just to see what's wrong and to oppose what's wrong. It's to see what's wrong and what's malfunctioning, what is dysfunctional in society, and then to go, hey, we could do this instead. You're meant to embody an ideal then. You're meant to present the rebellion and the new idea that you're bringing as an ideal, as something tempting, as something that others can go, oh yeah, look at that. You're achieving so much more. You're so much more functional. You're so much more together. You're so much more at peace. You're so much more whole. We actually want more of what you've got. But so often on this planet, we just rebel. We push against, we oppose, we see what's dysfunctional, we see what's wrong, but we don't put that much time and that much effort into coming up with a solution. So the real role of the true rebel is not just to break stuff up, is not just to smash things with a hammer. It's also meant to be, and it should be, a productive role where you're breaking things up and you're breaking things apart, but you're offering a solution. You're offering a better alternative. And the way that you do this is you become the ideal, you become the alternative, you embody it, and then you exude it out from you and you offer it up as a better idea and as a better potential. And then you might be able to tempt the status quo to actually take you seriously, to actually consider your point of view, and perhaps even to become a little bit more like you. And this is how we drive evolution. We offer better alternatives. We don't just stick our nose up and stick our middle finger up at everything that's wrong. We see what's wrong, but we also go, well, how are we going to do it better? What can I offer that's better than what is currently being done? It's productive, it's proactive. Otherwise, society's just going to shun you even harder. They're just going to oppose you even harder. They're just going to solidify themselves in what they are currently doing. They're just going to become even more firmly seated in their present state. And then you haven't served evolution at all. And this brings me to the rebel's cautionary point number 2. The more violently you oppose something, the more violently your opposition will rise up in rebellion to you. If you are aggressive in your stance, you could end up being the reason that the thing that you are opposing becomes more aggressive, more real, more solid, more present as it rises up to negate and to offset you and your aggressive stance. And we've seen that time and time again. The more extreme the rebels become in their position, the more extreme the ones that they are rebelling against become in their position. So we end up with this pendulum that just swings back and forth, but the pendulum swings become more and more extreme, which means they become more and more destructive and more potent as they try to offset or cancel out each other. So you could actually, in your aggressive stance, in your rebellion, actually be creating and causing more of the thing that you are opposing and that you are rebelling against. Whoops, that's not what the rebel's meant to do. So as the rebel that you think you are, you're actually creating more of the problem. So, as a conscious rebel, which is what we're trying to be, productive and conscious rebels, you have a responsibility to be compassionate rather than aggressive in your stance so that you don't freak people out so much that you end up creating indirectly more and an extreme version of the thing that you are opposing. So, compassion and a bit more smoothness and deliberateness in the way that you bring yourself to the world and in the way that you are opposing goes a long way. Remember, you want to be the tasteful and enticing alternative. You don't want to be an aggressive thing that people feel like they need to protect themselves from by becoming more extreme in their own views. Which brings us to cautionary rebel point number 3. Things that can be or start out as an act of rebellion can very quickly become the norm. Every generation experiences this. And as a millennial, I don't mean to offend any of my fellow millennials, but I'm going to use the emos as an example here. What started off as a rebellious movement, and the emo movement was very much about trying to consider and include the little man, the little guy, the one that usually gets overlooked. And it was more of an acceptance and an encouragement for society to be more open-minded, more open-hearted, more tender, a bit more emotional, a little bit more connected, a little bit more considerate and compassionate and loving for people that were different. But very quickly, so what started out as a minority, very small minority, very quickly became somewhat of a majority. And I saw emos popping up all around me. And silly as this might be, for anyone who was around at the time, you might remember the Emo Kid song that came out. It was a joke song, kind of taking the piss out of the emos. And one of the lines in that was, "I'm an emo kid, non-conforming as can be. You would be non-conforming too if you look just like me." And this is the point that I'm making here. This highlights it perfectly, which is the only reason that I let myself be cringe and recite those particular song lyrics. What can start off as a minority and what can start off as a small group of people can very quickly become fashionable, especially amongst the youth. So you might start out, if you are one of the ones that are like a founding member of a movement, you might start out being very unique, being very different, being a rebel because you're not like other people. But if you're doing the thing kind of properly, I guess, then you're going to have more and more people that catch on and then want to be a part of that movement. So very quickly, what was an act of rebellion and what was pushing the limits and the bounds of society can become very normal and very socially accepted. Even what I've witnessed in my lifetime of how people that were homosexual there was so much prejudice against homosexuality and so much shame associated with it. Even just in my lifetime, that's done a full backflip. And now it's almost to the point where there's shame and prejudice associated with not being a homosexual. So something that was a thing that I fought for in my youth and that I stood for and that I was a rebel for, which was the acceptance of people of various sexualities, has now become the social norm. And it's just incredible. The ones that considered me extreme have now somehow, in the course of a couple of decades, become more extreme in my original views and my original thoughts than I am or than I ever was. What has happened? So this is very, very important. You've got to keep this in mind. Things that can be or start out as an act of rebellion can very quickly become the norm, and it can even become hijacked. So they can even be used and be hijacked by people that want to ride the wave of this particular movement to keep things normal. They want to solidify a new status quo where they still have the power and they still have the majority vote, but they know that the way to have the power and have the majority vote is to follow and ride this wave of rebellion and act like and pretend that they are rebels as well. And this is why it is so important for the rebel to stay conscious. You've got to be staying ahead of that wave, and you've got to be keeping a lookout for how the wave that you may have even set in motion or that you may have been riding for a very long time has become corrupt or has been hijacked. And you've got to keep in mind and be aware of when a thing that even once you stood for or you created a movement for has become a thing that is no longer an act of rebellion, but has become an act or a way of controlling and manipulating the masses. So just because something was a positive movement at some point doesn't mean that it's going to stay or remain a positive movement. And you've got to be aware of that, and you've got to stay ahead of the curve, and you've got to be willing, able, and actually even consciously and deliberately looking for ways to challenge your views, to challenge your beliefs, so that you're always questioning, you're always asking the hard questions, you're always being a rebel, you're remaining a rebel, because the worst thing is to start out a rebel and then to end up sucked into the status quo where you're being manipulated, your power has been taken from you, and you're just going along with and believing what everyone else is going along with and believing in. So you gotta keep setting the wave in motion, but the only way to do that is to stay a rebel. And you've got to remember, the major quality of a rebel is their ability to see things from an external perspective, to challenge things that are the norm, to ask the hard questions, to come up with new ideas, to challenge old ideas, to set new things in motion, and to undertake the difficult process of pulling themselves apart, smashing themselves to bits, and rebuilding themselves over and over and over again in a way that is actually appropriate. And in your consciousness, you've got to remember that you are a champion of the people. You're not just being opposing for the sake of it. You're not just being confrontational for the sake of it. You're not just changing your mind for the sake of it. It is a conscious and deliberate choice and act. And it is something that you are deliberately doing. So you've got to stay ahead of the curve. You've got to stay conscious. You've got to stay awake. You've got to keep asking the hard questions. The role of the rebel is a difficult role. So if it's ever starting to feel like, it's just really, really easy and I just have to sit back and relax now because now everybody thinks the way that I want them to think, then chances are you're being sucked into and absorbed by the new status quo, and you are going to become the thing that the next generation of rebels is rebelling against. That's going to happen. You presently are rebelling against a previous generation of rebels that settled into the new status quo and stopped challenging themselves, stopped changing their minds, stopped looking for new perspectives, and stopped seeing things in a different way. So stay a rebel. Keep asking the hard questions, even if it's taken you a whole life to get everybody on your side. If they are now on your side, but you feel that there is something wrong, it's gone too far, it's become corrupt, it's become tainted, you've got to be able to smash up your whole self-concept, go back to the drawing board, reconsider, and look at what it is that society actually needs now. Where are they at now? What is appropriate and relevant for now? Not what was appropriate or relevant for when you were an emo back in the day. What is appropriate now? You've got to keep asking those questions. You've got to stay on top of it. You've got to stay a rebel. Otherwise, you become redundant and you just get reabsorbed back into the thing. So it doesn't matter how deeply invested you are in something. As a rebel, you've always got to be willing to let the thing go if it doesn't serve anymore, or if it has become corrupt, or if it's gone too far. So you must be able to reassess your stance and make your mind up as you go along. The conscious rebel has a responsibility to reassess and think for themselves always, staying ahead of the curve and encouraging forward evolution, changing their minds wherever necessary, and as many times as is necessary as well. So, my fellow rebels and outliers, stay conscious, stay relevant. Don't just be confrontational for the sake of it. Don't just be opposing and pissed off for the sake of it. Find something to stand for, find something that you believe in, embody that ideal, and then present that ideal to society as a better option and make it tempting. So, don't be aggressive in your stance. Find a way to be compassionate and to remain compassionate, and again, to make your new ideal seem like a really, really, really good idea so that others want to take it up as their own ideal. But then also remember and keep in mind that something that was once an act of rebellion, if you're doing your job properly in some ways, will or could become the norm. So you've got to stay conscious, you've got to stay ahead of the curve, you've got to be able to reassess your stance and make up your mind as you go along, because just because something was held up by you as an ideal at some point doesn't mean that it's going to remain an ideal, because things can become corrupted or be taken way too far very quickly and very easily. So as a rebel and an outlier, you have a responsibility. You have a unique life purpose. You got to keep this in mind. You got to take it seriously. Give yourself something to stand up for. Give yourself a reason to live. Make your life one that is worth living and that counts for something, even if it's just quietly and behind the scenes. You're affecting everything with your energy. You're having an impact in just the way that you live your day-to-day life and the way you present yourself and bring yourself to people and to society, the way that you think, the way that you feel. It all has an impact. I know that you feel frustrated sometimes because you've got so much energy and you don't know what to do with it. I've just given you the solution. This is what your life is for. This is why you're here. And this is something that you can very deliberately and consciously invest your energy into, and it's productive. And it's going to be really satisfying because you're fulfilling your role as a born and intended and natural rebel and outlier. You serve society, whether they realize it or not. So keep at it.